G-Roll Electronic Productions, baby.
Build Back Better goes from pandemic to major recession. Before we get started, go ahead and hit that like button. Share that out. Share this out so we can get this information out there. And if you're not if you're not signed up for Patreon, sign up for our Patreon where we talk about things that we can't quite talk about here on YouTube. America is lurching from pandemic to major recession, and after Biden's massive government spending programs released the inflation cracking, writes Andy Pudster. As we emerge from the pandemic, Joe Biden's economic policy bundling is driving America into a brick wall of massive stagflation. Now, why is the Biden administration so determined to ignore both the cause of Carter's economic failure and President Reagan's very successful formula for reversing it? Like Carter, the Biden administration is acting as though it can ignore fundamental economic problems forever. Newsflash, it can't. The longer we wait to seriously address inflation, labor shortages, and supply chain problems, the worse the threat of an inevitable and deep recession becomes. Case in point, on Wednesday, Biden claimed December's inflation report showed a meaningful reduction in headline inflation over the last month, demonstrating that we are making progress in slowing the rate of prices increase. If you are working or middle class America, that may have surprised you. The Bureau of Labor Statistics actual report on inflation showed that in December, inflation hit 7% for 2021, the highest inflation rate this country has seen in nearly 40 years, and we reported on that. It's just crazy. But most Americans has never lived through anything like the current inflationary surge. Those who have recall all too well the ruinous consequences of applying failed Keynesian demand side physical policies, Keynesian, to a sluggish economy beset by a rise in inflation. Simply put, increasing demand by infusing more money into an inflationary economy results in hyperinflation. I mean, this is economy 101. You learn this in the basics, rather than economic prosperity. If common sense isn't enough to confirm this result, there's ample historical evidence. In 1971, President Richard Nixon declared that he had embraced Keynesian economics. By the middle of the decade, his successor, President George Ford, was struggling and failing to win, i.e., whip inflation now, the battle against rising inflations, and we all know Ford lost that battle. And then came in Carter, and President Carter criticized Ford for failing to beat inflation, then doubled down on government spending. So they never learned their lesson. They just keep doubling down on stupid. After pledging to eliminate the federal deficit, Carter saw it increase during his term from $27.7 billion in 1979 to nearly $59 billion in 1980. By the end of the decade, America was thoroughly mired in the nightmares of stagflation. And, you know, we're seeing that now, of course. Physical stimulus and easy monetary policy pushed inflation to astronomical levels that wiped out household savings and made basic necessities increasingly unaffordable for working families. When Ronald Reagan took office in 1981, one of his first orders of business was to join forces with Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker to end the perpetual cycle. By that point, though, the only way to bring inflation down to be manageable level was to endure a sharp, painful recession. Mortgage interest rates reached the high of teens. But it was only after the economic hangover ended and economic fundamentals returned to a stable equilibrium that America was able to experience the economic miracle of which was the 1980s are known. Reagan's approach was politically courageous, given the tendency of American voters to punish the sitting president for economic downturns. It's called leadership, and he was ultimately rewarded with the landslide re-election in 1984. And of course, the Democrats try to demonize Reagan. But today, Biden is taking the opposite approach. Faced with the potential for rising inflation coming out of the pandemic, Biden opted to act as if nothing was wrong and bull ahead with his plan to fundamentally transform American economy with trillions of dollars in new government spending. They just try to spend us. You can't spend your way out of a recession. After Democrats and Republicans had already spent 5.3 trillion on bipartisan stupid 19 relief during the pandemic, Biden and his Democrat allies dumped another 1.9 trillion into the economy last March for no better reason than to claim credit for another unnecessary round of stimulus checks. The impact was to juice an already energized demand while reducing supply with government checks that encouraged leisure at a time when the pandemic was already slowing a labor force recovery. With fewer people working and businesses having underproduced and underordered during the recession, soaring inflation was going to be the inevitable result. It's not like they weren't warned, and not just by people on the right. People like myself, other citizen journalists, been calling this thing out. The leading economists from previous Democratic administrations, including Larry Summers and Steve Ratner, wrote extensively about the Biden's massive government spending was going to lead to a surge in inflation and eventually recession. The data kept proving them right, but the Biden administration refused to pay heed. Even as evidence mounted that inflation was here to stay and getting worse by the month, Biden kept pushing for even more deficit spending in the form of the $3.5 trillion Build Back Better bill, which is a disaster. It's been a disaster from the beginning. We've been warning about this, and the recession is coming. But so people need to start preparing now. But let me know what you think. Leave your comments down below. Like, share, and subscribe, and check out themarkrepublics.com for the latest in news. Until next time, peace.